Hey, welcome back to JG3 Reviews. My name is James, and here we like to explore the world of fountain pens, ink, and paper. And today is no exception. It's an ink day. This is Birmingham Pen Company's Burnt Charcoal ink, and it is exactly what it sounds like. It's a color of ink that replicates burnt charcoal. Now, Birmingham Pen Company, if you're not familiar, is based in the Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania area. It is a family-run business, and they do their ink in batches, and I really enjoy every single one that I've gotten so far, along with a couple of their pens. And today's might not be the most vibrant color, but it is a color that is so relevant to Pittsburgh with its industrial revolution history and everything else. Burnt charcoal, I think it's a color that just suits the history of the city and the area so well. And I can see why this one is in their color wheel. Now, the pen today I'm going to use is the Jinhao Dadao 9016 with a medium steel nib. I think it brings out the shading of this ink well, and they play together nicely. So a really good pairing here. I'll start with Clairefontaine paper here in just a second, and then we're going to look at over a half dozen more, and we will do a chromatography. We will do a water fastness test, and by the time I'm done, you should have some idea of whether or not this ink might be for you. Now let's start with the bottle. Now I know that they've changed the labels lately on some of their inks. I've had this bottle since 2022. I had no idea it had been that long until I looked up the old order to see what I had paid at the time. The bottle is a 60 milliliter glass bottle. I really like it. It has an almost apothecary look to it, and my daughter loves the old school font on this older label. And while the packaging for this ink bottle is long gone, one thing that Birmingham Pen Company does really nicely is packaging. They have some really nice boxes, and the things they include really top-notch stuff. And so you'll find that their customers generally become pretty loyal customers. Now in 2022, I paid $15 for this bottle, but inflation like everything else. The current price is listed as $17. Now the day that I'm recording this, they actually are out of stock, but you can subscribe for a notification for when it comes back into stock. And let me warn you, if you go to look at that, you're probably going to find another color and another ink that you're curious about too, because they really do have some really neat shades going on. And looking at how it performs on various papers, this is my base notebook, my spiral where I keep a catalog of inks and do the water tests and swatches and things. And you can see that the ink does not feather or anything like that here on the Clairefontaine, and that it does have a nice shading effect. It's not overly dramatic, but on most papers you are going to get some shading. We'll see that even more here in the swatch in just a second. Of course, on this paper there's no issue on the other side, no bleeding, no ghosting, nothing. That just performed quite well. Let's start today's with the cheap copy paper all over the place, right? This is Hammermill. It is a 20-pound weight paper and writes smoothly. I think the pen's generally a medium nib likes this paper, and you can see here this ink does quite well. There's nothing egregious on this side. Good performance for the paper that it is. And when you go to the other side, it was about average in terms of ghosting. No bleed through on the other side. Sticking to inexpensive for a second, this is a composition notebook. It's a true red. It's made in Vietnam. Lots of big box stores sell a variation on this theme of Vietnamese paper, and I find that it writes very smoothly. That's why I keep these around. And you can see here, no feathering issues here. There is some nice shading, and on the other side, only just a little bit of the ghosting, but for the most part, really good performance on Vietnamese composition notebook paper. And staying in Asia, we also have this Chinese notebook, the M Shoy, available on Amazon. Really nice off-white colored paper. And this is right after I had re-inked the pen. And you can see there it wrote nice and wet, so it's a little bit more saturated than on that last notebook. I did get just a bit of ghosting through the paper, but no bleed through to the other side. And as you can see over here, this paper, that's pretty typical for most inks. Then we have a bit of paper from India. This is Ayush paper, one that I really like, another off-white paper. And again, no feathering. Ayush is pretty good about bringing out shading, as you can see in some of these other inks as well. And it did the same with the burnt charcoal. No issues on the other side there either. Some of you are saying, yeah, but I use Rhodia paper. Okay, well, here's your Rhodia paper. And as you can see, very similar performance as expected. to what we saw in the Clairefontaine. There's no feathering or anything like that. You have nice shading. This was a nice wetter sample, and you can see there kind of the base color of that ink that looks really good, and it performed well. No issues on the other side. And another paper with no issues on the other side, which is typical for this paper, is the Indian notebook that you can buy at Walmart for a couple of bucks. This is that Pen Gear dot grid spiral that I like so much. And again, no feathering, no bleed through, no ghosting, just perfect performance on this paper with some really good shading. I mentioned swatches. I'll do another one on the Clairefontaine since it's a different type of paper to see how that performs. But this is the swatch that I have on Tomoe River paper, and expectedly it has done quite well, and that gives you a really nice big idea of what kind of shading properties this ink has. Single pass, double pass, and triple pass. And again, as you would expect, no feathering, no issues there whatsoever, and really good performance. It did not even bleed through on that third pass of this paper, which, as you can see, some inks do. I think that's Wearing Gold, Call of Cthulhu, and I believe that is Rouge Granat. All right, let's do a fresh swatch here. This will be on the first pass, and a second pass, and a third pass. These are all really wet, so this will be interesting to see how that goes. All right, while we wait for this to dry, how about we do some Jinhao related dry times? And again, this is a number 6 nib. At 5 seconds, still wet as you would expect. Here is 15 seconds, and that is getting drier. At 30 seconds, that's pretty much dry. I don't think there's even a need to do the 60-second test. 30 seconds, it was ready to go. So that's nice, quick drying ink. All right, one of the things that I really like to do is a water fastness test. Will this ink hold up if you should get caught out in the rain, run through the sprinkler on your way in from work? You know, whatever happens to you that makes you get your inks wet, that could be a personal problem, right? Whatever that is your writing going to be legible, salvageable if the paper has gotten wet? So this ink is actually, I should say, this has been written for, 2 or 3 weeks, I think closer to 3 weeks, maybe even a month ago I made this test sheet. So if it's going to stand a chance, then, you know, we've given it every possibility. All right, let's see how that performed. I'm just going to dab this, because that's what I would do if I was trying to salvage it, if this had happened by accident. And you know, that's actually already an indicator that it's not too bad, because I've reviewed some inks here lately where it literally pulled everything off wherever the water was, and there wasn't even anything but the blue lines of the grid left. This has done better. I don't know if it's enough to be called a water-fast ink, but it is enough. I can read water test. It is still there. The grid is still there everywhere that the water was. So it looks like you would have a good chance of being able to salvage what you've written. And again, this had sat for anywhere between 2 and 4 weeks. As I recall, it's definitely been weeks, not just moments that grid was made. So, you know, the longer it's dried, it definitely had its best shot, and I would say that passes. I can see what that says. No problem whatsoever. That brings us to what is some people's favorite thing, and that is a chromatography. Now, I will do a video soon on how I do these. I've been asked by several people, and it is kind of a fun little thing to do. Really, really simple, straightforward stuff. But it's always interesting to me to see what makes up a particular ink, especially when it is a color that is a basically very simple, you would think, color. You know, it's burnt charcoal. That's like shades of black and a little bit of gray and, you know, things like that. But there is so much more to it. As you can see, it has great shading properties. The more ink, the wetter the writing is. Can be pretty dark, or it can be light and shady, like some people I know. And that makes it an interesting ink, because in different pens, you will get this, or this, depending on the wetness of that nib and feed. But what does it take to get this kind of shading on what seems like a basic color? A lot more than you might think. So you've got quite the spectrum of color here. Here is the original line, and there you see that black base of the ink, and then quickly into a yellow. And if you're not familiar with chromatographies, you often see a yellow in a black ink. And and you do sometimes see a full spectrum as you do here. I remember when I was in elementary school, I had some ballpoint pens that wrote with black ink, and 6 months after you wrote your homework out, you'd go back through your spiral, and all of your black writing, it was doing chromatography right there in my notebook, all of your black writing would have a yellow halo around it. I always thought that looked a little snotty and gross, and that's one reason I switched to using mainly blue inks at the time. But all that to say, it's just that part's not so unusual. But you can see here that you go from quite a bit of that yellow into that blue hue, and then into a pinkish red hue, and then into a green, and then a little bit more of kind of a gray pink hue at the very end. Just a lot going on here to get charcoal. But after I had done this and was surprised by just how much color there was, I looked back at the ink, and you can kind of see that, can't you? You can see that it is really a much more complex ink than simply looking like charcoal and ash. And that's one of the fun things about this hobby and doing chromatography in particular. There's always more than meets the eye. All right, so what do I think about this ink? I think if this is a color that you like to use, if, like me, you sometimes like to go toward more earth tones, natural colors, things that maybe don't pop off the paper, but instead give you a nice, solid, foundational color to your writing, I think this is a really good one. It behaves well. I've had no feathering. It works great on most papers, shades on most papers. Has been very happy, by the way, in that pen. I've had no dry out issues. It really, especially in this one, worked well. I'm very pleased that it passed that water test, because this is an ink that you could use in more work-related stuff. And yet it's not just a standard black, and it's not really a gray ink either. It makes things a little bit more interesting if you look for it. Also like that it's made in the USA. Not that I have anything against the other countries, because I love me a good international ink, but, you know, who doesn't like something that's homegrown? I like that, and I love that it's a small family business, and that does encourage me to keep going back and checking to see what they have new today. All right, what do you think? Is that a color that would interest you? If you have experience with Birmingham inks, what is your favorite one? Because I always like to know. That's sometimes how I find these inks, because you guys like to share, and I like it when you do. If you want to see more ink reviews like this, be sure to subscribe and hit that bell so that you know when these things land. And in the meantime, God bless you and have a great week.